Right, John. So cheers for hopping on today. Can you just bring us through your journey, bring us through maybe your background in playing a bit of sport when you were younger and then getting involved in the nutrition side of things and then eventually ending up with the Kerry senior footballers?
Yeah, so I would have played football, like most young lads, I suppose, in Kerry at underage all the way up, I suppose, to senior at my club, Dingle. Always had a very, very keen interest in sport, all sports really, um, which led me to choose, I suppose, when I was writing my CAO form, sport science was in University of Limerick was one that jumped straight out of me. All my choices actually were on sport, to be honest, and they were all very sport specific courses. I think there was one in Carlow. So yeah, I knew it was something, an area that I always kind of really wanted to get into, I suppose. And yeah, chose sports science in the University of Limerick. And sports science is great. It gives you a really good taste, I suppose, of all the various aspects of sports science, from biomechanics to sports science, to sports psychology, to nutrition, to strength and conditioning. So it gives you a very good taste of all the different areas. But the way things are gone, I suppose you really do need to kind of specialize now. And I took a little bit of a year out. I suppose a lot of areas did really interest me. Sports psychology even was something that was I still even find very, very interesting as a field. But having thought about it, I suppose for about a year after I finished sports science, I decided that sports nutrition was kind of the one that interested me the most. So I pursued my master's then with the University of Chester in exercise and nutrition science. Got a call as I was doing my master's to get involved with the Kerry senior hurling team. So I got some hands-on experience there. And yeah, I've been involved with various Kerry teams ever since. And then last year got the call to be involved with the senior footballers, and yeah, with them again this year now. So it's great. Long windy road, I suppose, really.
Yeah, and like being from Kerry, obviously the football team is the ultimate. Can you describe what it's been like to be involved with them lads for the last couple of years? Like some huge names there, some big characters, and yeah, can you just bring us into the dressing room a little bit and kind of tell us what it was actually like to be involved with that group of players?
Yeah, so like you said, I suppose when you get involved with the Kerry senior footballers, you're expecting, I don't know what you're expecting really, but it's very much the same as most dressing rooms. Being totally honest, it's probably a disappointing answer for yourself, but I mean it's that banter flying between fellas. You know, it's very, very similar, I suppose, to most dressing rooms. Like you said, you've your different personalities, and I think that's one thing that's always interested me about team sports is the different characters, the different personalities, the different things that motivate different fellas, and how different fellas gel, I suppose, and stuff. So, and I suppose from my own perspective, it's trying to tap into that a little bit, fellas, different personalities and stuff. But in terms of a dressing room, very, very, very similar to most dressing rooms you'd see, being honest. You know, you have your jokers, you have your fellas who are a little bit more quieter, reserved side. But yeah, it's GA, it's just your standard GA dressing room, really, being honest. Yeah.
And to go on the journey with those players, like I presume you would feel all the highs and the lows just as much as they would. Like, are you there on match days? And what's your involvement then, even at training sessions and things like that?
Yeah, so I'd be at every pitch session and every game. Yeah. So for me, I suppose GA players typically, you know, even the research is pretty clear on this, typically kind of under fuel. So for me, it's about creating as many fueling opportunities for the lads as possible, making sure there's always a snack at hand, making sure there's always a sports drink at hand, you know, making things as readily available as possible, making sure they're getting their recovery shakes in straight after training. So I suppose it's very much hands-on, but I suppose the beauty of being at every session as well is that it's you can kind of have a little, you know, informal chat with lads in the corridor at the stadium, or a lad might pull you and hop a simple question off you. So I do think there's great value to being around the training sessions, and obviously at games. Then I've been involved in all the catering provision. So I've been over at the hotels and, you know, writing our menus. And so that's kind of where a lot of my time we spend when it comes to away. But again, hotels are staying overnight. So again, when we would typically travel to games the night before games. So we know the benefits of a carbohydrate load now. I suppose that a lot of everyone seems to be talking about it, the benefit. We know the benefits. So I suppose again, for some of our bigger lads, would need to be taking on very large volumes of carbohydrates. So again, making sure those snacks are there at hand and available to lads as well. So yeah, it's good. I enjoy it, and I really do, I suppose, see the value of being at each and every pitch session.
And when you talk about say working with Kerry and you're really at the elite level of your sport there, is it still about nailing the basics, or does it become more advanced as you move up through the ranks and when you're really trying to get the last 1%, or is it still about just preaching the basics to those players?
Being honest about it, for the most part, it is the basics. I think we do get caught up in, I suppose, majoring in the minors a little bit, but I suppose you do need to make sure that you're nailing your foundations. So again, I suppose there's a wide spectrum in terms of maybe guys who are just out of these, whose knowledge and nutrition practice and nutrition behaviors mightn't quite yet be at the level of the lads who are on the panel for a while. So I suppose how deep your messaging goes is very, very dependent. There's like I say, just a very wide enough spectrum in terms of the messages you'll be delivering to different guys. But I suppose essentially the message is you want guys to really value nutrition, to make sure that they're aware of the impact nutrition can have in their performance. And for the most part, I must say the lads are very, very good in that respect.
What would be the basics then? If you're talking about, maybe there might be some younger players listening here who are trying to just get some advice in terms of how to actually get, say, their fueling right for game day and things like that. What would be the basics that they should be looking after then?
First and foremost, and again, I think it's one that lads often overlook, is are you eating enough? Are you eating enough to meet your demands? So club players might be a little bit different in terms of inter-county players in terms of the amount of fuel required. But having said that, the club schedule has gone very, very demanding. A lot of guys, a lot of club teams would be in the gym maybe a couple of times a week, a couple of pitch sessions. And again, it's what are your individual demands and what are your individual needs? One thing I see lads getting caught up in is my man is eating this, so-and-so is eating that. That's not how nutrition should be. I suppose we all have different demands. We all have different preferences and fueling needs. So again, thinking of it practically in terms of a GAA team or a GAA club particularly, you might have guys coming off a building site, or a Sparky was up and down a ladder all day, or hauling, and that has huge energy demands compared to somebody who might be working as an accountant and sitting at a desk all day, largely sedentary. So straight away there, you've massive differences, in energy output, I suppose. And again, even going into the positional aspect in terms of goalkeepers versus midfielders, and taking all those things, they're very, very important to consider first and foremost. So I would consider that the most basic is eating to meet the demands of you as an individual, taking all those aspects, I suppose, into consideration. Layering, I suppose, again, on top of that, are you getting a good balance across your macronutrients? Are you eating, I suppose, GA players, which I understand is the large bulk of your audience, I would imagine. Typically, GA players, from my experience and from what the research suggests as well, are brilliant at getting their protein in, because I suppose as males and even females, we associate protein with muscle mass and being, muscle bound and ripped and toned and all these words as well that go with it. So you couple that then with the fact that you go into the groceries, into the supermarket now, and you see protein, milk, protein, protein bars, protein cereals, there's protein written on everything. So it's really heavily marketed as well. And so what that leads to really is probably, from what I can see, nearly always an overconsumption of of protein and an underconsumption of carbohydrates. So GA players typically, particularly at club level, are very, very poor at consuming adequate quantities of carbohydrate. And even at inter-county level, some guys still have almost a fear of carbohydrate and that misconception and that association with weight gain, which is not ideal considering how important carbohydrates are for performance, and if you're going to perform at your best, that means fueling adequately. If you haven't fueled adequately, you're not going to be anywhere near your best. So those two things are very, very important, and I would consider those the starting point for any young player to get right.
I was going to ask you about the carbs actually, yeah, and there is almost a fear that, like you said, players might gain weight if they have too much carbs. Is there, like, I'm sure you come across this a bit, and it might even be more prevalent at club level, where players might think, I need to be lean to perform at my best. But is there a case of going too far and some players focusing on getting too lean? And can that actually inhibit your performance then if you actually have too low a percentage of body fat?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, if you're leaner isn't always better. A lower body fat percentage is not always better. And oftentimes when you dip into those single digits, you can see guys starting to display with niggles. You can see lads starting to present with, recurring injuries. They might be picking up colds and flus. So there is a fine line. Obviously excess fat mass isn't ideal for a sport like GAA also,
Mm.
but leaner isn't always better. That's a message, I suppose, that I'm constantly delivering, even at club level, but even still at intercounty level, leaner isn't always best. I suppose when you have access to things like DEXA and body composition analysis, for whatever method of assessment you use, it's still something you're trying to say to lads, or isn't always better. You still hear the whispers, you still hear the whispers in the ground. So and so got 9% or so and so, whatever it might be, and you're kind of going, lads, it shouldn't be, leaner isn't better. And I'm constantly delivering that message, and even at club level, it's very, again, going back to the point I made a minute ago, it's very individualized. Everybody is different. I would rather guys go off metrics like performance, how they feel on the pitch, how they felt with 10 minutes to go in a game, than working off a number like that, because it's really only one data point, and context is hugely important.
Yeah, I think that's a good one for players to be aware of. You mentioned earlier about when you're dealing with lads in Kerry and someone might pull you aside and you're having these little one-on-one conversations all the time. I know there's a broad kind of spectrum in the change room. Is there any main area or main challenges that some players are facing or that they're asking about most, or is it across a wide range of topics that they're asking about?
It would be across a wide range of topics, but I'll just give you an example there. So, and again, this I'm sure happens. It does happen, of course, at club level right up to intercounty. So we would have a lot of teachers, for example, on our intercounty, on our panel, and even my own club at home, we would have a few teachers as well. So, when I work with teachers through my own business, Target Nutrition, you're delighted when you see a teacher coming, because they have such an ideal structure and routine throughout the day. The breakfast at the same time, small lunch, big lunch, after school, go and train, eat after training, job done. Easy structure, it's made there for them. And that's great. And that takes most of our lads, that structure, most of our or all of our teachers have throughout the whole year. Then you're into the business end of championship, and all of a sudden that structure is completely gone, and that routine is completely gone. You're gone from knowing exactly what you're doing every single day at the exact same time, that going completely out the window. So that's challenging, I suppose, trying to maintain that routine when you have no real obligations to really, do you know what I mean? There's nothing to get you out of bed in the morning to have breakfast, and you might have breakfast a little bit later, and all of a sudden you're missing a snack, and then all of a sudden you're consuming fewer calories than you would have been when you were in school, and then we're seeing a little bit of weight loss, and so these are all challenges maybe that teachers. So that's just one example. That'd be one thing we would have, I suppose, been very conscious of maybe this year.
One area as well that I would have an interest in personally when I'm playing club football would be around, say, caffeine intake pre-games. We would have heard a couple of years ago about the Leinster rugby lads. They would stay off drinking coffee for a few days, come up to a game, and then have caffeine tablets or caffeine gum in the dressing room before a game, and that would help them get a kick of energy. You've probably seen in dressing rooms like energy drinks going around, or pre-workout, or again that caffeine gum or tablets going around. Do you have any advice on this, or what do you tell players if they're asking you stuff around taking caffeine pre-game and how it can affect them potentially on the pitch?
Yeah, so caffeine would be an example of one that would be really, really important to be honest, with any supplement. The trial before any game day, I would never, even at club level, I wouldn't recommend trying caffeine of all things, I suppose, just before the day of a game. Maybe it's something you'd want to trial at training sessions beforehand. You'd want to kind of, mess around with your dosages, your mechanism, like your I suppose forms of caffeine. So there's multiple forms of caffeine, from your simple tablet form to coffee, like you mentioned, to your pre-fuel, to your gum, to your gel. So they all have individual, I suppose, specific times to take them at as well, and all those things need to be considered. These are all the things that you discuss, with the athlete, with the player that you're working with, and make them make the best decision for themselves. Do you drink coffee regularly? Do you typically consume caffeine day to day? How many coffees would you drink a day? See what their tolerance might be like. See how gels make them feel. Some guys don't like gels, don't like the taste, don't like how they sit in the gut. So these are all questions you would have back and forth with an athlete, I suppose, before making an informed decision, really.
I'll bring you to half time now, and in a lot of change rooms now, you'll have your wine gums, you might have your Jaffa cakes, and then your Lucozade Sport or things like that in the dressing room. What's the thinking behind that? If a player is unsure about should I be eating sweets at half time, what's the actual thinking behind why they are doing that?
So we would have a selection of carbohydrates, so it's the only real structured opportunity you have to refuel in a GA game. You know, we know that exercise lasting over an hour, you want to typically take in 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. Anything lasting over an hour, a lot of games now are lasting over that. You know, so it just gives you a very good opportunity to take fuel on board. We want very, very easy to digest carbohydrate, you know, which is basically sugar. So they're all, I suppose, they're all traveling to the same spot. They're all, you know what I mean? They're wine gums, Haribos, jellies, gels. They're all very easily, rapidly digested forms of carbohydrates. So when we consume higher fiber foods, for example, they take far, far longer to break down. So we're not going to get that benefit. The game will be over by the time we start, you know, by the time we can use that uh, carbohydrate source as fuel, whereas something very simple and very sugary, we can use it very, very rapidly. It'll see us over the line the last few minutes of the game.
When you're talking about post game, then like it might be frustrating on your point of view when you're looking at lads and they're all going to go for a few points generally after a game, which is going to affect the recovery a lot. Is there anything players can do to, if you are going for a few points, to actually prevent yourself doing too much damage or delaying your recovery process too much?
Yeah, so my message would be fairly simple, I suppose. Look, I'm a realist as well. I know the crack, I know how it is, but I suppose what I would say to lads is try and get a feed in post session anyway. Do you know what I mean? Or post after the game, before anything is done or before any pint is drank. You know, prioritize recovery, get in a good form of protein, get in a good form of carbohydrate. Do you know, and listen, enjoy your pints. You know, I suppose GA players typically know of a few opportunities to get out and have the crack together. So I'm all for it. You know, if you're somebody who is quite serious, by all means, you know, use the tips and tricks to have to sneak a pint of water in between your pints, or you know, have sneak in the odd 0-0 point, and use all those tips. And again, what I try to say to lads as well is enjoy your pints in the night, but make a real conscious and I suppose, yeah, make a real conscious decided effort, you know, to not let it seep into the following day. Do you know what I mean? Have a good breakfast the following day, and I suppose get up in the horse again.
The comparison is often made when you might see a picture on social media of particularly rugby players having a couple of cans in the dressing room or going for a couple of pints maybe after a match or having a glass of wine. The difference between rugby and GA in terms of the culture, there's probably more, you go all out in GA when you have a chance to go for a few pints. But is like, what do you make of that whole argument between the two of them? Like, I don't think drinking bans, to be honest, really happen anymore. Even at club level, it can be hard to tell players now to stay off drink for 3 or 6 months or whatever they would do. But what's your opinion on that argument between the culture of GA and rugby in particular, I guess, and having a couple of pints versus the sort of binge drinking culture that we might see in GA a little bit?
Yeah, I think we're probably just a little bit behind in that regard. You know, it's typically the trend when you're talking about professional sports. You know, I mean, the thing you have to keep remembering is that GA is amateur. You know, and it's a difficult one to manage. I think it's very important that we're aware of the effects that alcohol has on performance and health. You know, I mean, the research couldn't be any clearer on that. And I think all you need to do is go for a few pints yourself to realise that it's probably not the best for you. You know, so yeah, listen, I just think that I'd be very against drinking bans, and I think that any decision that's made around alcohol should be probably player led. If it was something that the players, I'd say, lads, look, we're going to stay away from it until the final or whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? Rather than the manager going, right, lads, that's it. There's no drink. I think there's different approaches. There's also different levels of drinking. You know, I mean, I've seen lads go on and a tear up for a day session. You know, and you know, it might be treated the same as a fella having a couple of glasses of wine at a meal. You know, and that's important, I suppose, to, you know, it's kind of that this blanket is thrown over it all as drinking is drinking. So there's levels to it for sure. And I think context again is hugely important when making these decisions, you know.
Definitely. One aspect that when I'm coaching players that they would be asking me about would be, say if you're in season and you could be towards the latter stages of the league or even in the championship, and they want to drop a bit of body fat as well as make sure they're fueled for game day and performing well. First of all, is it a good idea? And then second of all, how can you do it if that is what you want to do? You want to drop a little bit of body fat, but also make sure that you have enough energy to play well on game day.
This is in seasonal.
Yeah,
You're talking about it. I'd be straight up and honest. It's not ideal. Like, it's certainly not ideal to be chasing a reduction in body fat in season. Ideally, what we would like to do is kind of use the preseason to kind of nail body composition, you know, and
Okay.
then maintain to a certain, you know, to a certain degree in season. You know, I suppose, as you'd know, and as a lot of people know, to see, you know, to see a reduction in body fat requires a calorie deficit, and a deficit means you're not meeting your energy demands, I suppose, you know. So what you could do, I suppose, is I suppose, you know, implement a very, very small to moderate deficit, you know, so that you're still getting adequate fuel and your deficit isn't huge. There won't be any, at least you'll reduce the risk of any nasty side effects, such as, you know, increasing the risk of injury, increasing the risk of illness, under fueling. And you could probably really dial it up on the days, you know, you could dial it up slightly more, I suppose, on the days that you're training on the pitch, for example. But then your recovery just will slightly be impacted there as well. So as I say, not ideal, possible, but certainly won't have you at maximum performance, you know, maybe
Yeah.
slightly below it, but certainly not operating at 100%, you know.
Yeah. And when you're talking about, say, off season compared to in pre-season or in season, are there different nutrition protocols that you would apply? Say, take an example of the Kerry players, if they're coming and asking you how they should be fueling in the off season versus pre-season, and then when you're in proper league or championship, what would be the main differences between those different sections of the season?
Load probably is the primary one. You know, load in the preseason can be quite heavy. You know, if guys have had a good Christmas,
Yeah.
you know, so body composition goals can come into it again. Depending on the year, there might be new guys into the squad, you know, and you might really be chasing, you know, lean muscle mass gain with guys, you know, you might be trying to reduce fat mass with other lads. So it is a little bit individual. It becomes from my experience, at least a little bit more individual in the preseason, because that's really when you're chasing your main body composition goals. It's the only real window you have in the GAA calendar, I suppose, down here in Kerry is particularly chock-a-block with games, and the windows that you have with players to chase something like a body composition goal can be quite small. So the preseason is really where you have to go after that, you know. So that's where I suppose it would get far more individualized based on how long guys have been playing, where they're at in their career, what they're chasing. So that'd be the main difference. And then in season is purely performance based. You know, that's nearly blanket recommendations really in terms of what we're trying to do. We're all trying to fuel adequately. Again, obviously there's the individualized approach. Guys prefer different foods at different times, and you help guys develop fueling strategies, you know, very individual or specific to them. But that's where performance becomes the be all and end all, you know. So they'd be the two primary differences really.
And I know, just kind of changing topic slightly, your brother Mark is obviously out in Australia playing AFL. I think you went out there earlier on, did you, a couple of years ago? Were you there for when he won the grand final that time?
I was, yeah, I was. I was working at the time. I was doing a little bit of lecturing at the time, and thankfully a buddy of mine, Shane O'Rourke, covered me and covered my classes, and I hopped on the plane. Yeah, so it a great week out there.
Yeah,
It was mighty. I was brilliant to see. Uh, you know, the hard work, I suppose, pay off, because I suppose with a lot of our young talent heading out to Australia now, it all looks like rainbows and fairy tales, I suppose, from the outside. But I suppose when Mark went over first, I mean, we got to see the challenges. You know, you head over there first. You're with a host family. You know, they were brilliant, but you know, at the start it was difficult. You know, you're probably the worst. I'd imagine he was the worst player there for the first couple of
yeah.
sessions. You know, and you're thinking, geez, this is a steep hill. You know, so it was great just to see the move pay off for him, I suppose, from a personal standpoint, you know.
Mm. And I think you might have spent a bit of time with Geelong, maybe a couple of years previous, did you? Was there much you picked up there? Is there a big difference between the professional environment and the GA environment in terms of how they're running nutrition and things like that?
Absolutely. Look, there's loads of things that you would love to bring home and implement, but again, it's the fact that, you know, it's the professional versus the amateur environment. Really, they have, you know, kitchens that are fully stocked, you know, smoothie machines that you can work away out of, you know, frozen berries. They have their milk in the fridge. The challenge to bring that back to Kerry or to any club or organization is that they're only there twice a week or three times a week. Do you know what I mean? So
Mm.
who keeps that stock in place? Do you know what I mean? And it's just all those things become a lot more challenging. You know, they have club chefs. They get fed their 2 or 3 times a day. It's unbelievable to see. And obviously, yeah, you can take, it was great. Dr. Dominique Kondo was who I shadowed. She was the sports dietitian there at the time, and she's unbelievably highly regarded. She's published multiple research papers herself, and she was really good to me. So it was great just to get an insight, as I say, into how they operate at professional level. And I suppose, especially in a game that is quite close in terms of its demands to GAA, I suppose in terms of professional sports, it's as close really as you can get. So it was great. It was good to get an insight.
Yeah. I just have a couple of quick ones then before we finish off, John. You've been great with your time. One thing I'd love to know is, has there been any books or podcasts that you've read or listened to recently that made a big impact on you?
I read Dan Carter's book lately. His new one, I found it unbelievable. So I thought that was really, really good. So from, I suppose, that performance mindset side of things, I thought that was a great one. I read a book lately called Tuesdays with Maury, a little bit more about real life, and I found that one really, really good as well. A great read. In terms of podcasts, I listen to a lot of nutrition podcasts. I like Chris Williamson's podcast as well. I listen to that quite a bit, depending on who he is on. So yeah, it depends on what I'm in the farm for. Obviously, since getting involved with Kerry, I'm in the car quite a bit. So podcasts are one that I do listen to regularly. So yeah, it depends the mood, I suppose.
Yeah, just on like the Dan Carter one, I know you would have mentioned that you had a bit of interest in sports psychology when you were studying, and did you get much of an insight into how his mind works, the way he's wired, what made him so elite?
Absolutely. I mean, it's no surprise when you read the book that he got to where he did. Obviously he's a talented man, but when you add in that mindset, it's only going to go one way. So there's no real surprise, I suppose, after reading the book, how he's viewed as the best number 10 of all time. So it's unbelievably insightful, and just to get an insight into how the All Blacks would have done certain things, and it's great. It's one you'd read. 2 or 3 times, and even to hear him on the High Performance podcast as well. He's just a very, very impressive guy. Very, very humble. It's not a lot of, I think a lot of what he said, even in the book, depending on how he would have worded it, would have come across maybe as arrogant, but it doesn't. He kind of has that humble touch as well, which is rare. So yeah, I was well impressed with that one.
And if people want to follow the stuff that you're doing, John, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to get in touch or whatever, we've launched a new website with Target Nutrition. We've taken on a new coach as well there, Kira O'Rourke. So we're really pushing that at the minute. Work with a lot of GA athletes one-to-one, but not just GA athletes, anyone involved in any sport. So if anyone wants to get in touch, either check out my website, drop me an email, or just drop me a message there on Instagram or whatever it might be.
Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. Cheers, man.